these are very important to Joe and to Evelyn and to us, so we're glad you can make it today. I thought we'd reflect first upon what does it mean to have a 90-year-old life. 90 years. That's a long time. 90 years. You know how many presidents you've been through, Joe, in 90 years? 16. That's a lot of politics, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's why he's political. And how many popes do you think you've been through, Joe? 4. 8. So what happened? You're political with politics, with presidents, but the popes, you're... He's been a good man, a very good man. We all have ideas about Joe's life. We've all experienced with him, but just a little bit. We always little cross sections of his life. Peggy remembers him as Mr. Joe, who lived up the street with her best friend Barbara. They go to Ocean City from time to time. Don Payne knows Joe mostly from working at the Dunbar, and they socialize from time to time. Just a little bit. Who else? Bernie and his family. They know Joe mostly as my father-in-law, and they see him at parties and dinners, mostly at Bernie's house. Thanks, Bernie. So everybody has a little snippet, just a little cross-section. But I thought, since we're celebrating his life today, maybe we can look a little closer at that, focus on it a little bit, flesh it out a little bit, and see what he's been doing in his last 9 years of life. So, Ashley, please help me with these cards. I apologize having them, but I tried to put everything down, 4 cards in 90 years, so I need a little help here. It actually starts 111 years ago. Joe's story begins 111 years ago. Pietro de Benedetto arrived at Ellis Island from Italy. Pietro was Joe's father, and he was 4 years old. Most of the family that came at that time settled in the New York area, in Manhattan or Brooklyn, and the family grew up there in Joe's early youth. Pietro got married. They had a son, Joe Benedict. That was April 10th, 1925. And Pete, he was now Pete Benedict by this time. They Americanized their name, gave it the Benedicts. Pete was in the hat-making business, hat manufacturing business. He did that for quite a while in New York, but the business, because of depression, closed. So to find more work, Pete moved to Baltimore, brought his family, Joe and Margaret, and also Joe's younger sister, Eileen, and they came to Baltimore, and Joe grew up in Baltimore now at this time. When the war broke out in 1941-42, Joe got a job working at Glen Elm Markets in the assembly line, making war materials for the war effort. While he was there, he made a friend of Joe Wan Sr., who was Joe's father, and he said, "Joe, why don't you come home to my house and visit me and meet my young sister, Evelyn. You might like her." Well, Joe did. Evelyn was 15 years old. Joe was all 17 years old. He was a cradle robber at that time. And that was the beginning of their long, long romance. So that happened in 1942? 42, I think. 43. Another thing about this story, Joe never talks too much about himself, as you probably know. He's pretty closed-mouthed about his background. That's why I'm telling you some of these things. And I try to be very subtle and clever getting this information out of him, so we didn't want to tip him off that we were going to have this party. So from bits and pieces, I can put this information together, and I hope I've got the chronology correct. So, when the war breaks out, after Joe turns 18, he joins the Merchant Marine. And I said, "Joe, why don't you join the Army or the Navy? Why don't you join the Merchant Marine?" He says, "I didn't like any of that military training and fighting stuff. I just want to get away from that stuff." Well, unfortunately, Joe didn't know at the time, but the Merchant Marine was taken over by the Department of the Army, and their job was to provide war materials to Europe and also to Russia, and keep Russia in the war. So Joe's ships would go overseas overseas and take war materials there. And one time, his ship found itself in the Murmansk Run. Now, I don't know if he knows too much about the Murmansk Run, but it was a trip from New York to Scotland, and the convoy would form up in Scotland, and they would meet the British destroyers, and they would go up the North Sea to the Norwegian Sea, and all the way up the coast of Norway to the very top of the Scandinavian Peninsula, and turn around the other side, and that's where Murmansk, Russia was. Altogether, it was about a 1,500-mile trip. The bad thing about the trip was, not only was it cold and frigid and frozen and rough seas, but the Nazis, the Germans, had taken over Norway at that time, and they used all their ports and harbors to attack these convoys, trying to keep them from going to Russia. So not only was it bad getting up there, but then you had to go back another 1,500 miles. So Joe was part of that, and fortunately he survived that. I asked him one time, I said, thank you for your service, Joe. Thank you for your service. I asked him, I said, weren't you scared doing that? It seemed awfully frightening to me. He says, I was only 18 years old, I was immature, I thought it was exciting. So, shows what kind of temperament he has. So anyway, the war was over. He came home. He continued to woo Evelyn, and they got married on Groundhog's Day in 1946. That was 69 years ago. So congratulations on your
46.
Oh, 46? Okay, 47, 69.
I thought you were
I thought it said that. Anyway. All right, so Joe was still in a merchant marine, and he was moving along pretty well. Actually, he was going for his captainship. But after Barbara came along in October 1948, he felt that he couldn't be away from home for 3 to 6 months on these different cruises or deliveries or contracts that you had to go to if you were a member of the merchant marine. So he quit the merchant marine, and he came back to Baltimore, and he started into other jobs. Again, the chronology of these jobs I'm not too familiar with, but I'm pretty sure I know what the jobs were. One of them, he was a floor refinisher, where you go to somebody's house and put chemicals on the floor and get that big scrubber thing and get all that dust shooting up and all this chemical coming up your face. You didn't have respirators at that time. Didn't have this at that time. Joe said that was one of the dirtiest jobs he ever had. He also was a money collector for a telephone solicitor, where some guy would call you up on the phone and say, would you donate so much money for this particular cause? And you'd say, yeah, okay, just to get the guy off the phone. Yeah, I'll give you $10. And then Joe would show up at the guy's house saying, oh, you got that $10? Sounds like a pretty bad job to me. He also became a milkman, and he actually would get up in the morning, deliver milk, cheese, eggs, take the bottles back. He did that for several years. He liked that job because he was outside, and he got finished early, but he didn't like dealing with too many nasty customers sometimes. That wasn't part of his feeling about that job. Because he was a child of depression, Joe saw how poverty was there, how people lost their jobs. So he felt the best job to get would be working for the government. And he finally got a job working for the U.S. Postal Service. He became a mail carrier. And that was one of the best jobs he said he's ever had. He was stationed primarily in Pikesville area. It was great for him because he was out early hours, nice people on his route. And he got finished early because that meant he had more time to get a part-time job to supplement his income. And that's what happened then. That's when federal armor came into Joe's life. He became primarily a courier. One of his jobs was he'd have a nightly run up to Wilmington, Delaware every night for 3 hours. After he got off at work, he would get home probably 3 o'clock in the morning, take a few hours nap, and go back to his job as a mailman. He did that for a long time, and he said some nights were really bad luck, bad fog, bad conditions, but Joe did it. He also became a, I think he used to go pick up checks after hours. He would go to banks and pick up checks for Dunbar and then take them to the main office in East Point, drop the checks off. Did that. When Joe finally retired from the post office, he was asked to become a air courier. And that would be when you go to the airport, there'd be a Federal Armored truck show up. They put a conveyor belt, Joe would be there with a clicker, and these bags of money would go into the belly of the plane. He'd count them all in, close the plane up, and get in the plane. The plane would arrive wherever it's going, usually to a city that had a Federal Reserve Bank. Passengers would get off, Joe would get out, there'd be another armor car at that end. Bags of money would come down, he'd click that, and they'd go into the truck, and away they would go. So he did that for several years. Part-time, but not a lot. But he was very diligent, conscientious, trustworthy, loyal employee. And he became friends with the owner of the company, Jim Dunbar, Federal Army. So when Joe continued to do these jobs, he eventually asked Joe if he would mind going out and checking out some new areas, new cities where they were interested in putting in new branches of the business. And Joe would do that. He'd fly around the country, talk to real estate agents, find a warehouse where they thought would be good for a location to put a vault in. And they would do that. And then Joe would also hire the managers for those places, and the manager in turn would hire the drivers and hoppers to work those locations. And this went on for quite a while. Joe did this a lot, and he loved traveling, flying out there. And he became, again, good friends of Mr. Dunbar. When there was a problem at the branch, either with the manager or with some employees, Joe would go out there and see if he could straighten it out. If not, he'd let the bad people go. And he was very good at that too. It was a tough job, but all the men respected him. He was fair. Dunbar respected him. So he became well-liked, well-known in the industry, and well-respected at Federal Army. Let's see, where we're going to pick up from there. We're getting close, folks. We're getting close. Okay. All right. Here's some personal things you might want to know about Joe. You didn't know about Joe. He's a sportsman. In his youth, he was a duck pin bowler.
Yes.
Right.
He was a fast-pitch softball pitcher. Had a big wind-up like that. He wasn't much of a golfer. He loved pro football, especially the Cleveland Browns. Actually, he got season tickets to Cleveland Browns home games, and every Sunday he'd get up early in the morning, drive up to Cleveland, watch the game, come right back to Baltimore, get up and go to work as a mailman the next day. He was so loyal that the owner of the Browns at that time was Art Modell, who eventually owned the Ravens. He appreciated the loyalty of Mr. Benedict here, so he gave him season tickets to the 50-yard line and invited him to meet some of his favorite players on the Browns. So he did that too.
And he came to ball.
Yeah.
Good.
Came to ball. Joe and Evelyn are both great fans of Florida. They've been going to Florida for a long time. They have been going to Florida for a long time. They took Barbara and I when Alice was just about a year old. They used to, first they started out on the East Coast, mostly Fort Lauderdale and Miami area. And then they eventually moved over to the West Coast, where they actually had a house. They had a house one time, and they also owned at different times 2 condos in the Clearwater, Newport Richey area. And we visited them many times over the winter season, and it was fun. They still go from time to time to Myrtle Beach to visit his sister who lives down there outside of Myrtle Beach. One last thing, and I thank really Joe for this. Joe introduced me to Porterhouse Steaks, steak tartare, and the Prime Rib Restaurant. He always enjoyed good food, and he was always ready to go to the Prime Rib at least once or twice a year to take us with him. Thank you, Joe. We go over to his house, and another thing he introduced us to was appetizers. And as you come to my house, you're always going to load it up with appetizers, because thank Joe for that. We always have wonderful appetizers before we sit down to eat. And it was a great experience learning all those wonderful things from Joe. So talking about food, I think we're just about ready to eat. So let's get on with this. Barbara says, please don't make it too long because people are going to be hungry. But it is 90 years, dear. I didn't have time to tell you about when Joe was kidnapped when he was a baby. You never heard about his movie career.